Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the cool, damp air of a colonial farmhouse somewhere in early America. Your boots sinking softly into churned-up mud as you pass bleating sheep, sleepy cows, and one stubborn goat eyeing your shoelaces. You're about to meet cheese at its most ordinary, and somehow, its most strangely regulated. It's the 1600s or so, give or take a decade, and you're standing by a rickety wooden shed that smells like sour milk and damp straw. This is where tomorrow's breakfast and next month's barter deal come from. Cheese isn't just a snack here, it's currency, survival, and an excuse for a neighborly squabble about who stole whose curds last winter. You probably won't survive this world very long, there's dysentery in the well and wolves at the treeline, but at least there's cheese, right? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you're at it, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I love knowing who else is drifting off with these sleepy stories. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge toward the smoke of the hearth, peeking at a squat woman pressing curds into a round mold lined with rough cloth. Cheese making here is mostly guesswork. There's no fancy thermometer or shiny steel vat. Just cow, hands, salt, prayer, and whatever wild bacteria decide to crash the party. It's calming in its repetitive churn. Milk, heat, press, salt, wait. And while the rest of the world worries about royal decrees or Spanish ships off the coast, your biggest daily stress is whether your cheddar will come out hard enough to last until spring. One mainstream fact historians remind us of: early settlers brought European dairy know-how, especially the English and Dutch methods. Cheese made the long trip across the Atlantic because it kept well in barrels, unlike fresh milk. So, families who could keep a few cows quickly turned into mini dairies. Local barter thrived on cheese wheels, your neighbor's eggs for your wedge of semi-hard cheddar, maybe a rabbit thrown in if the rind smelled good. And here's a quirky twist. Some communities believed burying cheese underground for weeks made it taste richer. An idea they may have borrowed from old English country folk who'd sink cheese in a peat bog or shady hole behind the barn. The result? Some delicious wheels, some wheels you'd only feed the pigs. But even bad cheese was better than no cheese. Historians still argue whether these settlers really trusted the underground aging, or if burying it was just a desperate way to hide food from tax collectors, or from hungry neighbors with sticky fingers. Hard to know, since the only written records about cheese at the time are scattered in dull court logs and scribbled farm diaries full of spelling so bad you'd think the alphabet was optional. Picture it, you're standing beside a stack of wheels, each coated in wax or lard, smelling faintly of hay and musty cellar air. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters. Inside, the only worry is if the mold is the friendly kind. A good wheel could mean warm bread, extra butter, maybe even a few coins at market. A bad wheel? Well, tomorrow's breakfast might taste funny, but you'll scrape off the green bits and toast it anyway. The early colonial dairy scene is so sleepy it's almost sweet, though the daily routine could be downright punishing. Up before dawn, milk the cows, strain the milk, heat the curds, press, flip, salt, repeat. Some days the smell of curds would cling to your clothes for hours. But at night, when the last ember glowed and the mice rustled in the pantry, cheese sat quietly on the shelf, promising just enough calories to see your family through the next frost. A final whisper of strange trivia to drift on. A handful of early villages had unwritten rules about how many cheese wheels a family could claim as household stores. Any extra? Technically fair game for neighbors in need, or nosy magistrates sniffing out undeclared trade. It was a weirdly communal world where your neighbor might knock for a candle, a cup of salt, or half your best cheddar wheel if the winter was long and the cows ran dry. Don't worry, your midnight pantry raid wouldn't get you hanged. Just maybe gossiped about for years. And that's how our oddly regimented American cheese story begins. A few stubborn cows, a lot of mold, and more rules than you'd think for something that just wants to sit on a shelf and grow a nice rind. You step back into the chill morning air, brushing crumbs of straw from your coat as you trudge down the muddy lane toward the village square, where, believe it or not, your cheese might just cost you extra if you're not careful. See, early America didn't just let cheese live rent-free in your pantry. No, your precious cheddar was yet another excuse for taxes, levies, and village dues, often enforced in ways that sound downright silly today. Picture a tiny wooden shack by the roadside, a single-board clerk hunched over an ink-stained ledger. He watches wagons roll in from scattered farms, every cart creaking under barrels, sacks of grain, and those sturdy wheels of cheese. It's his job to count, weigh, and sometimes sniff your cargo. If you're bringing cheese into town to sell or trade, you owe the local council a cut. Sometimes it's a penny per wheel, sometimes a chunk of your best wedge. Don't pay? Well, maybe your cheese, accidentally, gets left out in the sun all day. One mainstream fact historians agree on. Cheese taxes cropped up in colonial towns partly to fund public projects. Road repairs, local watchmen, or the odd wooden bridge across a swampy creek. It made sense in its way. Cheese was valuable. Hard to make, hard to keep fresh, easy to barter. So, of course, local leaders found a way to skim a bit off the top. The quirky part? Some villages used cheese as an actual tax payment. No coins in your pocket? Fine, 2 wheels of cheddar will do nicely, thank you very much. Some records show these cheese taxes stacking up in the town hall's drafty storehouse, only to spoil or feed local mice fat enough to rattle the rafters. Imagine paying your property tax today in cheddar. Your accountant would weep, but the local raccoons would be thrilled. Historians still argue whether these taxes really boosted local budgets, or just made farmers sneak around them. There's a famous court record from Massachusetts mentioning a farmer fined twice for hiding wheels under hay bales so the taxman's nose wouldn't find them. He paid double, once for the cheese and once for being a bit too clever. Picture yourself standing by your ox cart, pretending to chat about the weather while the clerk jabs a stubby finger at each round wheel, counting under his breath. Behind him, a gaggle of gossiping neighbors pretend not to watch too closely. After all, everyone knows whose cheese is the fattest, whose cows are grazing richest, and who's about to try slipping an extra wheel past the tally. One sleepy fact most people forget. These taxes didn't always hit just the big farmers. Small families making just enough to trade at market sometimes paid the same flat fee. Didn't matter if you had 10 wheels or 1. A fair system? Not exactly, but not the worst injustice you'd face in a world where wolves might eat your livelihood overnight. Slip further down the rutted lane with your wagon, imagining the quiet resentment bubbling under the villagers' polite nods. A bit of cheese here, a bit of tax there. Next thing you know, someone's telling ghost stories about a tax collector who tripped in the cellar and got buried under a pile of wheels gone bad. Did it happen? Probably not. But in a world where cheese held as much weight as coins, a little folklore about greedy clerks was bound to bloom. Some families got creative. They'd sell cheese only to trusted neighbors behind closed barn doors. They'd hide a wedge in the flour barrel, or pack curds in waxed bundles that looked like soap. Of course, if you got caught, the punishment was mild by today's standards. Usually a fine, sometimes a good scolding in front of the village. And maybe your best wheel donated to the clerk's supper table as an unspoken bribe. The sleepy lane winds on. You pass the town hall. More a shack than a hall, really, where those precious cheese taxes sleep away the months in cold storage. If you're lucky, your cheese pays for the blacksmith to fix the bridge, or the night watch to shoo off stray dogs. If you're unlucky, it turns green before anyone eats it, and you're stuck wondering if that community fund was ever real. One last odd crumb for tonight's road. In some corners of early America, cheese taxes were collected not yearly but on feast days, tied to fairs or harvest festivals. So imagine paying your dues in cheddar while fiddles screech nearby and half the village juggles cider mugs. Only in early America could taxes, dancing, and suspiciously moldy cheese all share a wooden table under lantern light. Your wagon bumps along, wheels squeaking, and you can't help but smile. Taxed or not, that cheese might still buy you a new hoe, a tin cup, or maybe even the neighbor's gossiping silence for another season. And that, dear dreamer, is the price of cheddar in a world that never wasted an excuse for one more coin. You steer your squeaky wagon down a narrower track now, the ruts deep enough to splash your boots with yesterday's rain. Under your arm rests a single precious wheel of cheddar, wrapped in muslin and oozing that soft, nutty aroma that only comes from weeks of careful tending. You're heading home, back to your root cellar, a dark, cool sanctuary that's more fortress than pantry. And tonight, you'll find out how the laws of early America followed your cheese all the way into the ground. In these first drafty homesteads, storing cheese wasn't as simple as dropping it in a fridge, because, well, there were no fridges. There were cellars, barrels, hanging racks, and if you were fancy, a whole outbuilding dedicated to dairy. But each method brought its own headaches, and plenty of towns turned those headaches into laws that seem downright peculiar today. One mainstream fact: root cellars and spring houses were standard across the colonies by the 1700s. A deep pit under your cabin, lined with stones, kept cheese cool enough to last. And a spring house, a tiny shed built over a cold stream, worked like nature's refrigerator. No electricity, just constant damp chill. If you had one, your neighbors might envy you more than if you owned a shiny new musket. And here's where it gets odd. Some villages passed local ordinances controlling how you stored that cheese. Did you pile it on wooden planks? Fine. Better keep those planks off the dirt floor, or you'd risk a fine for encouraging rodents. Want to store multiple families' cheese together? Better label each wheel or risk a neighbor's midnight nibble and a village dispute that might drag you to the town clerk's dusty bench for a lecture. Historians still argue whether these cheese storage rules were truly enforced or just threats scribbled in fragile town ledgers to make everyone behave. One scrap of record from New England mentions a cheese keeper, who visited cellars twice a year, sniffing for rot and mold that might bring pestilence upon decent folk. Hard to say if he really showed up, or if it was just an empty title to keep people's wheels clean and the rats away. Imagine your breath clouding in the cellar air as you crouch by your stack. Each wheel rests on a slatted shelf to keep the damp at bay. A faint smell of earth, sour whey, and old burlap tickles your nose. You brush away a spider. You tap the rind. You knock gently for that satisfying hollow sound, a sign it's aging well, not turning to sludge. Quirky detail for tonight. Some early settlers hung their cheese from rafters in cloth sacks. Yes, cheese hammocks if you like. It kept pests away and let air flow all around. The result was sometimes delicious, sometimes questionably sour. But hey, better a wheel of rope-aged cheddar than a mouse party in your root cellar. Don't let the sleepy setting fool you. Cheese theft was a genuine fear. One rumor in a Rhode Island village claimed a rival family crept in at night, swapped fresh wheels for their own moldy ones, then blamed the rats. True. Who knows? But imagine waking up to find your cheese looking suspiciously smaller, your neighbors suddenly looking plumper, and the local magistrate rolling his eyes as he tries to settle the matter. Cheese crime drama, 17th century style. Your lantern flickers as you adjust another wheel, running your thumb along the wax coating. Maybe you hum a tune, something to drown out the creak of the beams above and the gentle drip of spring water behind the cellar wall. Outside, the world might fret about taxes or raiders, but down here, your biggest fear is whether that soft spot on the cheddar will spread before next Sunday's supper. Back then, storing cheese wasn't just about survival. It was a small point of pride. A house that could keep cheese firm and flavorful through a humid summer or freezing winter was worth a nod of respect. A well-tended cellar, a few plump wheels stacked just so, these things whispered to your neighbors, "We're prepared. We'll eat. We might even trade." So tonight, as you climb the creaky cellar steps and hook the latch shut behind you, you've done your duty to the cheese laws of your tiny world. The shelves are raised. The wheels are labeled. The air is cool. And if you're lucky, the cheese keeper won't sniff out a suspicious mold bloom this season. One last sleepy truth to drift on. Some villages find families who let cheese spoil without good cause, branding them wasteful or negligent. In a world where calories were survival, letting good cheese rot was almost sinful. So rest easy knowing you've stacked your wheels, locked your cellar, and bribed the mice with a crumb or two. Tomorrow you'll check for cracks in the wax. Just another quiet ritual in the peculiar law-bound life of early American cheddar. You wake before dawn to a rooster that sounds like it swallowed a squeaky hinge. The ground outside crunches under frost as you tug on your boots and slip into the chilly yard. Today's task? Pay a visit to one of early America's least glamorous, but somehow most powerful figures, the village cheese inspector. Sometimes called the cheese constable, if you wanted to make him sound fancier than the reality. In the hush of the waking village, you shuffle past stone cottages and smoking chimneys until you find him. An elderly man with a crooked hat and an even more crooked nose, leaning on a stick by the way station. His job? To sniff out fake cheddar, doctored butter, and any cheese that looked suspiciously light for its size. He's the final gatekeeper between you and the market stalls. One mainstream fact. Many colonial settlements appointed official food inspectors. Bread, butter, and cheese were high on the list. These local watchmen enforced assize laws, basically medieval carryovers that made sure people didn't water down the milk or sneak in cheap fillers. If your cheese didn't pass muster, you could be fined, humiliated at the stocks, or forced to sell at a discount. The idea was simple. Keep folks honest, keep cheese edible, keep neighbors from throwing stale curds through your window. A quirky detail for you to chew on. Some cheese constables carried official sniffing sticks, thin rods or spoons used to poke holes into a wheel to check texture and smell. The inspector might jab your cheese, hold the plug to his nose, and declare in front of the whole village whether you were trustworthy or a no-good curd cutter. Imagine today's health inspector poking your sandwich with a stick while the whole grocery line watches. Sleepy humiliation at its finest. Historians still argue whether these village cheese inspectors were fair guardians of food safety or petty tyrants on power trips. Some old diaries moan about inspectors taking bribes. A wedge slipped under the table to forget that a wheel was half mold and half optimism. Others swear the inspectors saved people from food poisoning by catching bad batches before they hit the bartering stalls. You stand there now, wheel in hand, heart thumping a little as the cheese constable lifts your prize and weighs it on an iron scale. The balance dips, the chain rattles, a crow caws in the distance. He pokes it once, twice, mutters something about good bloom on the rind, then slices off a tiny bite. Yes, he tastes it too. You hold your breath. One raised eyebrow later, he grunts his approval and hands it back. Pass, and you're free to sell your wheel at the fair or swap it for fresh eggs, dried apples, or a candle to chase away the endless dusk. Fail, and your name might circle the village gossip mill faster than a barrel rolling downhill. People talk. They always have. And bad cheese is a fine excuse to talk louder. Of course, there were loopholes. If you didn't fancy your chances with the cheese constable's picky nose, you might risk selling your wheel at night, out by the orchard fence where no one knows but your buyers would ever judge it. A bit shady, maybe, certainly illegal if you got caught, but who wants to pay a fine when there's milk to skim and cows to feed? Your path takes you past the local inn, where the constable might be nursing a mug of ale later, paid for, no doubt, by all those voluntary samples he collected during his morning rounds. If you slip him a wedge of your best cheddar, maybe next week he skips your cellar altogether. Historians still puzzle over how often this happened. Was he corrupt or just practical? Either way, your cheese made its rounds. You press on, passing half-dozing hens pecking at old crumbs. The sun peeks through clouds like a shy candle. In a world where so much was unpredictable, weather, wolves, sudden taxes, it's oddly comforting to know someone's job was simply to make sure your cheese was, at the very least, real cheese. You might grumble about the sniffing stick, the scale, the taste test. But come winter, when you unwrap a wheel from your cellar and cut into a firm, perfect wedge, maybe you'll remember that crooked constable and mutter a reluctant thank you. He kept your neighbor from watering down curds. He kept the village kids from biting into something foul. He kept gossip honest, well, mostly. One last soft truth for tonight's watch. In some towns, the cheese inspector wasn't paid in coins but in slices, meaning he quite literally ate his way through the job. Not a bad gig if you liked dairy and didn't mind villagers glaring at you every market day. So, next time you grumble about modern health codes, remember the sleepy man with the sniffing stick, the crooked hat, and a cellar full of wheels that owed their honesty to his nose. You leave the cheese constable behind, his crooked hat bobbing between wagons as he pokes suspicious wheels from other nervous farmers. Your boots crunch along the frostbitten lane, following the winding path toward the open fields where carts and pack horses gather for their slow crawl to the next village. If your cheddar passes the sniff test, the next question is simple. How far can you get it before it spoils, and what odd laws might chase you down the road? In early America, cheese wasn't just a snack, it was a traveler rolling from one dusty settlement to another. And as the colonies grew, so did the tangled network of trade routes connecting muddy farms to hungry townsfolk. But those rutted tracks weren't always friendly to a wheel of cheddar. Spoilage lurked in every rut and pothole. One mainstream fact: by the mid-1700s, trade routes crisscrossed the colonies. Horse carts, river barges, and coastal sloops moved barrels, crates, and yes, cheese. Farmers often pooled wagons together, sending one trusted driver to rattle along for days, sometimes weeks, to bigger markets. Cheese was precious cargo, especially in a world before sealed packaging or reliable cold storage. And here's the quirky bit: some towns made spoilage a finable offense. If you sold cheese that turned bad on the journey, you risked paying back the buyer, or worse, facing public scolding for unwholesome trade. Records hint at petty disputes in town squares, with neighbors arguing about whose cheese soured in the sun because someone forgot to pack enough straw or wet cloth. Imagine today's delivery app fining you for letting your ice cream melt on the porch. Same principle, just more squeaky wagon wheels. Historians still argue whether these spoilage fines really protected people or just padded the pockets of local magistrates. Some diaries mention clever traders bribing the inspector to look the other way if a wheel smelled more like wet socks than sharp cheddar. Others hint that the threat alone kept drivers alert. After all, no one wants to ruin half a season's wages by letting a wheel bake in the midday sun. Picture yourself now, riding shotgun on a rattling wooden cart. The wheels lurch over muddy gullies, the driver clicks his tongue at the horse, and you catch the faint, milky tang of cheese wrapped tight under burlap. It's wedged in beside sacks of oats, maybe a crate of apples for good measure. The air hums with buzzing flies, the cart's axles squeal at every bump, and your only insurance against disaster is a damp cloth draped over your cargo and a prayer for cool breezes. One wagon break, one thunderstorm, one lost wheel rolling off a bridge. Each little mishap could ruin a shipment meant to buy nails, candles, or a pair of sturdy boots. And if your buyer down the line sniffs something sour, you'd better have a good excuse ready. or enough coins in your pocket to pay the offense fee that some towns demanded for poorly managed wares. Travelers along these routes swapped tricks to keep cheese fresh: pack it tight in straw, drench the cloth in cider vinegar, or ride by moonlight when the air cooled. Some even dug shallow roadside pits to hide cheese for a night if the sun proved too harsh. Risky? Sure. But better a hidden wheel than a spoiled one. Imagine your wagon pulling up at a lonely outpost. One dusty tavern, a crooked post for tying horses, and a bored clerk who takes your name and peeks under the burlap. He gives a grudging nod if your cargo smells fine, or a disappointed sniff if it reeks. He might record it in his ledger or wave you along with a sleepy shrug. He's seen worse. Someone always tries to pass off old cheese for new if the journey's been rough. A curious side note for your dreams tonight: some early settlements tried to make spoilage less likely by passing laws about travel days and resting spots. One record from Connecticut mentions an approved cheese route, where drivers had to stop at certain inns known for having cool cellars. Travelers grumbled, of course. It slowed them down, cost them extra coin, and sometimes gave the innkeeper a chance to skim a wedge as storage fee. Historians still puzzle over how strictly these pit stop rules were enforced. Maybe they were more suggestion than command. But the simple truth stayed the same. Once your cheese left your cellar, its fate was at the mercy of weather, wagons, hungry mice, and the honesty of the driver. And you, perched on the cart's creaking edge, can do little but squint at the horizon and hope your wheel arrives as sharp and firm as it left your farm. Maybe you hum a tune to drown the axle's groans. Maybe you flick a fly from your sleeve and wonder if the buyer will argue the rind looks too soft. In this peculiar world, cheddar isn't just food, it's trust wrapped in wax and cloth, rolling down a road toward someone else's supper table. So lean back, feel the jolt of another rut, smell that faint, sour note that might just mean you'll owe someone a few pennies at the next village. It's all part of the price you pay for moving cheddar through a world that never stops finding ways to spoil a good thing, unless you're clever, quick, or blessed by the breeze. You part ways with the rattling wagon and step off the dirt track into the quiet shadows of a village church. The stone walls are cool to the touch, the wooden door creaks open with a sigh, and inside, candles flicker beside rough-hewn pews. Tonight, your wheel of cheddar follows you all the way here, because in early America, churches didn't just take your prayers, they sometimes took your cheese too. In these early settlements, the parish wasn't just the place you knelt for salvation. It was a storehouse, a neighborly bank, and sometimes a very hungry landlord. Many communities kept ancient European customs alive, and one of the quirkiest was the cheese tithe, a rule that said a portion of your dairy bounty belonged to the church. One mainstream fact: tithing cheese was nothing new. Back in Old England, peasants paid the local priest part of their harvest, grain, eggs, and yes, wheels of cheese, so the church could feed the poor, the clergy, and the endless stream of visiting dignitaries who expected a well-stocked pantry. The early colonists brought this habit across the sea, adapting it to the rough, unpredictable new world. So picture yourself trudging into the vestry with a small wheel wrapped in cloth. You set it beside a stack of other offerings: a sack of barley, a jar of honey, maybe a few lumpy turnips. The parish clerk jots your name in a brittle ledger, ink smudged by candlelight. Your cheddar joins the parish pantry, bound for the rector's table or the next big church supper that doubles as a village meeting and an excuse for gossip. Here's your quirky tidbit for the night: some church cheese never made it past the cellar. In one coastal parish, old records hint that the clerk skimmed the best wheels for private feasts, or quietly traded them with traveling merchants for spices, candles, or a warm coat. Historians still argue whether this was local legend or the plain truth. Was the cheese tithe sacred duty, or just a handy snack fund for the parish gatekeepers? It's hard not to imagine the mild resentment this stirred. You stand there now, shifting from foot to foot on the cold flagstone as the clerk eyes your cheese. Is it big enough? Firm enough? Did you scrape off that suspicious mold before you came in? There's no official sniffing stick here, just the clerk's nose and maybe his appetite. One soft flicker of historical fact: some parishes were so strapped for food that the cheese tithe kept the entire congregation fed through long, brutal winters. These weren't towering cathedrals flush with silver and silk. They were drafty clapboard chapels, patched together by settlers who needed every spare crumb to stretch a lean harvest. In that sense, your wheel of cheddar was more than charity. It was insurance that, when frost killed the turnips and wolves prowled the henhouse, the village wouldn't starve. But not all cheese tithes were purely practical. In a few dusty church records, you'll find fines for those who dared skip their dairy due. Forget to bring your cheese? Maybe you pay in candles. Or firewood. Or, if you're stubborn enough, endure a grumbling sermon about sloth and gluttony delivered with pointed stares from the pulpit. Imagine the hush of the little sanctuary as you leave your offering behind, the echoes of your boots fading while the candles flicker on. Outside, the gossip starts before you shut the door. Did you bring enough? Was it too small? Did you trade the best wheel with your cousin first and keep the worst for the church? Humans have always found ways to twist even the humblest gift into rumor. Historians still puzzle over whether cheese tithes survived into the later colonies, or if they melted away as money took over and new laws reshaped the old village ways. A few places kept the practice alive into the 1800s, especially in remote outposts where barter still ruled. Elsewhere, the ritual vanished, folded into cash donations and Sunday collection plates. Less mold, less smell, less chance for the clerk to skim a snack. Yet here, in the sleepy hush of your imaginary village, you can almost hear the soft thud of a wheel landing on the church pantry shelf. A tiny insurance policy against hunger, wrapped in muslin and marked by your family's good, or questionable, curd-making skills. So you tighten your cloak, step back into the crisp air, and head down the lane with lighter hands and a heart that hopes the clerk doesn't sneak your wheel home for his supper. After all, your cheese has done its holy duty tonight. Bless it or not, it's part of a quiet contract between cow, seller, parish, and the endless gossip swirling just outside the church door. You pull your cloak tighter against the chill as you leave the stone church behind, its tiny stained glass window blinking in the dusk like a sleepy eye. The lane crunches under your boots, and your thoughts drift to darker corners of the village, where cheese, of all things, sometimes found itself tangled in suspicion, fear, and whispered accusations of witchcraft. Yes, you heard right. In early America's jittery settlements, even a moldy wheel could fuel stories that someone, usually a neighbor, usually a woman, was stirring up trouble with unholy hands. After all, when livestock died mysteriously or milk turned sour overnight, people wanted someone to blame. And sometimes that someone was the person whose cheese didn't quite look right. One mainstream fact: the witch trials of colonial America are infamous for their paranoia. Massachusetts alone saw dozens accused of pacts with the devil for crimes as petty as odd dreams or sour milk. What's less known is how ordinary household chores like butter churning or cheese curing could slip into the suspicion net. Cheese refused to curdle? Butter wouldn't thicken? Maybe a witch was spoiling the milk. Picture it, you in your creaky cabin kitchen at dawn, coaxing warm milk into neat curds. But what if the rennet's too old? Or the cows feed off? Your curds split into a runny mess. You mutter under your breath, neighbors catch wind, and before long, someone wonders if you've got a charm hidden under the hearthstone. Historians still argue whether any real cheese curses existed, or if they were just excuses for neighborly grudges to boil over. But we do know that folk beliefs about dairy magic came with the colonists from Europe. Back in rural England and Scotland, people whispered that witches could hex milk, sour butter, or steal cream straight from the churn at night. So it's no surprise those same fears drifted across the Atlantic on creaking ships packed with cows and prayer books. One particularly quirky tale from New England hints at a mold mark, a faint pattern on a spoiled wheel that villagers claimed was proof of hexing. A wheel gone green in midwinter could spark a squabble that landed in court. Who hexed the cheese? Who'd sold spoiled curds? The difference between bad luck and black magic was often just how many neighbors liked you. You drift down the muddy path now, passing cottages with thin curls of smoke rising from crooked chimneys. Inside, women guard their cheese press like sacred relics, scrubbing wooden molds, salting cloths, whispering a blessing over the curd to keep it from turning before the next moon. Whether the prayer worked or not didn't matter half as much as being seen to care. In a village hungry for rumors, visible piety was its own protection. Picture the hush of a small-town hearing, a handful of solemn elders on creaking benches, one accused neighbor shifting on a rough stool, trying to explain why 3 wheels turned sour in her cellar while her cow's milk stayed sweet. Historians still debate whether these local disputes were truly about witchcraft or just convenient excuses to settle scores over land, fences, or unpaid debts. There's a strange calm to imagining these sleepy conflicts. No pitchfork mobs under a full moon, just quiet suspicion over moldy cheese, a neighbor's side eye at Sunday sermon, maybe a suspicious herb bundle tucked by the churn for good luck. In an age when the line between folk wisdom and folk fear was paper thin, a bad cheese wheel could nudge it from one side to the other. But even here in this uneasy hush, people found ways to laugh it off. Some farm diaries contain gentle jokes about cheese witches, women who could make curds set just right every time, no matter how fickle the cow or the weather. If your cheddar came out perfect, well, maybe you were blessed, or maybe you just knew when to skim cream and when to keep the neighbors guessing. So tonight, as you press on through the quiet lane, picture that perfect wheel tucked under your arm, safe from rumors and spoiling noses. Maybe you'll slice it for supper by the hearth, share a wedge with your closest neighbors, just enough to keep them sweet, to keep your cellar free from suspicious knocks when the next batch goes wrong. One last sleepy note for your pillow. In a few villages, odd old bylaws lingered on the books for decades, little warnings that any suspicious souring of milk could be brought before a local magistrate. Did they really haul neighbors into court for curd crimes? Or were those warnings more threat than promise, a leftover scrap of old-world fear that never quite faded in the new? Historians still argue the mold still grows, and your cellar door creaks shut for the night with a soft click. You slip through the hush of midnight, boots crunching softly as you steer away from the clustered cottages. The moon hangs low and heavy tonight, a ghostly lantern lighting your path toward a low wooden barn at the edge of the village. Because when day's gossip and cheese constables sleep, there's one place your cheddar might still find new life: the clandestine barter shed, where trade bent the rules and the peculiar cheese laws of early America often met their match. In a world where tax collectors sniffed your wheels, clerks weighed your tithes, and spoilage fines lurked down every muddy road, you can hardly blame folks for sneaking a wedge or two out the back door. And so, beneath slanted roofs and behind crooked doors, late-night deals unfolded. Cheese for eggs, curds for candles, a secret wedge slipped in exchange for whispered favors. One mainstream fact: barter was the backbone of many colonial settlements, especially in places where coins were rarer than foxes in the henhouse. Officially, the local council wanted every trade to pass through the market square, taxed, weighed, sniffed, and blessed by the clerk's ink blot. But reality cared little for ink. Out here, a soft wheel of cheddar was as good as silver. Maybe better, because you couldn't melt coins into a stew when winter bit through the doorframe. Step inside this shadowy barn now. The beams creak, hay rustles underfoot, and lantern light flickers on a rough table dusted with flour and stray bits of straw. A neighbor stands there, arms crossed, eyes flicking to the cheese bundle you carry. No ledgers here, just a nod, a handshake, maybe a half smile if your will smells sharp enough to make the trade worth the risk. One quirky twist? Some settlements tried being the polite word, to ban clandestine cheese swapping altogether. They scribbled fines into village rulebooks. Any dairy deal done after dark or outside the proper market gate might cost you double the value of your wheel if you got caught. But guess what? These same bylaws also had loopholes. Historians still argue whether village leaders turned a blind eye because their own pantries needed filling when the official storehouse ran bare. Picture the hush now, your fingers brushing the waxy rind as you set your wheel down. The neighbor sets down a bundle of beeswax candles, maybe a coil of fresh rope or a small crock of salted pork. Words are few. A sniff, a tap on the rind, a quick squeeze to test for firmness. If it passes, the deal's done. No clerk. No tax. Just a shared nod that both families will eat a little better tomorrow. You lean on a barrel, glance over your shoulder at the barn door. Outside, the night swallows any stray noise, just the sleepy hoot of an owl and the rustle of branches brushing the roof. In this moment, your cheddar is a tiny rebellion. It slips between the cracks of the village's tidy ledgers and rules, feeding bellies in ways the constable's sniffing stick can't reach. One forgotten scrap of history to dream on. Some barn barterers made their own secret codes. Scratches on wooden posts, symbols chalked on beams so trusted neighbors knew when the midnight market was open. A crooked cross for curds, a loop for butter, a star for salted wheels meant for winter stores. Historians still bicker over whether these codes were real or just the stuff of folklore, but the barn stood and the cheese kept moving. It wasn't always smooth. Some villages cracked down hard when these hush-hush trades got too brazen. Tales linger of confiscated wheels piled high behind the town hall, salted pork barrels seized, traders find enough to lose a season's worth of butter and eggs. Yet still, every new frost brought fresh footsteps to the barter sheds. Because when cold winds rattle thin windows and stomachs growl louder than the church bells, you do what you must. A mild truth: secret cheese swapping didn't always mean poverty or desperation. Sometimes it was just practical. Why pay the clerk's fee if you trusted your neighbor? Why haul a wheel all the way to the distant market square when a nod and a handshake in the barn bought you warm candles or fresh mutton for the Sunday stew? Tonight, you step back into the cold with your bundle under your cloak, lighter by a wheel of cheddar, heavier by a coil of rope and the knowledge that for now, the village's peculiar cheese laws have been politely dodged once more. No ledger to scold you, no constable to sniff your wheel. just the barn door swinging shut behind you and the soft creak of a mouse somewhere in the hay, hoping you dropped a crumb on your way out. So you slip down the lane, boots sinking into the frost, the moon your only witness. Tomorrow you'll nod at your neighbor in the square, speak of weather and fences and nothing more. And maybe, just maybe, the next wheel you press in your cellar will travel the same midnight path, quietly dodging taxes, tithes, and the watchful eyes of anyone who might think a cheddar wheel's place is only where the rulebook says it should be. The barn door clicks shut behind you and your boots crunch across the frozen yard. You swing your newly bartered coil of rope over your shoulder, feeling the faint chill of early dawn creep into your collar. Tonight, your cheddar has earned you more than a few candles or a sack of oats. It's bought you a place in a quiet little web of trust that kept these early villages stitched together, long before printed money ruled every purse. As you wander back toward your cottage, you pass a neighbor's field, rows of bare cornstalks creaking in the wind, a scarecrow slouched like a dozing watchman. And here you remember, cheese didn't just feed the belly or slip through back doors by moonlight. Sometimes it served as a neighbor's handshake, a bribe for small favors, or a thank you gift when coins were as scarce as warm nights in January. One mainstream fact: in many colonial settlements, payment in kind was normal. If you wanted your fence mended, you might offer a few wheels instead of cash. A traveling preacher might leave with a basket of cheese for the next hamlet over. Even debts between families were settled with cheddar, butter, or salted meat, whatever the seller could spare. And sometimes your cheese served as an apology, quiet, edible proof that you were willing to smooth over a bruised ego or a crooked fence line. One quirky tale drifts down to us from a village in New York Colony. A farmer who let his cattle wander onto a neighbor's orchard was said to have settled the damage not with coin but with a fresh wheel of smoked cheddar and a promise to fix the fence by spring thaw. No contract, no clerk, just curds, goodwill, and a handshake sticky with cider. Historians still argue whether these barter traditions were holdovers from old European peasant life or natural improvisations in a land starved for minted coins. Maybe both. In frontier towns, trust was sometimes the only bank worth depositing in. After all, paper money was easily forged and coins were heavy, scarce, and far too easy to lose in the mud. So, you stand at the fence line now, imagining the quiet clink of your cheese wheel landing in your neighbor's root cellar. Maybe you nod at each other in the fields the next day. No words needed, no contract signed. The debt is settled. The orchard fence will stand a little straighter come spring. And your cheddar has done its quiet work, as reliable as any ledger. One soft curiosity for tonight's half-sleep. A few local councils tried to regulate these neighborly trades. One Connecticut ordinance, dusty and half-forgotten, insisted that any barter above a certain value, cheese included, had to be declared at the village hall to avoid misaccounting. Of course, good luck enforcing that when two neighbors traded a wheel by the fence at dusk, out of sight of the clerk's nose. Picture the hush of these hidden exchanges. A wheel passed over a stone wall, a nod in the dim light of a lantern, and a silent promise that tomorrow's chores will be shared without fuss. No sniffing stick, no fines, no parish ledger waiting to scold you if your wheel's a little too soft. Just trust wrapped in muslin and the knowledge that a good neighbor is worth far more than a shiny shilling. Historians still puzzle over how much these small, off-the-book exchanges shaped frontier life. Some records hint that entire families survived winter shortfalls not by coin, but by quiet webs of curds, candles, salted pork, and shared labor. When a late frost killed the turnips or wolves took too many chickens, your cheese might be the difference between empty cupboards and a warm stew bubbling on the hearth. So you slip back toward your cottage now, ropes slung over your shoulder, the echo of frozen mud crunching beneath your soles. Maybe tomorrow you'll press another wheel for a new fence, a borrowed plow, or a bit of honey to sweeten next month's bread. Peculiar cheese laws or not, your wheel rolls where it must, through ledgers, under barn roofs, over fences, and back into the circle of hands that keeps this thin slice of early America stitched together against wind, hunger, and the long dark nights. One final sleepy truth: when the snow comes and the fire burns low, you'll carve that wheel with care. One slice for you, one for a neighbor if he knocks at the door with an empty basket. Because in this hush of frost and flickering lamplight, cheddar isn't just cheddar. It's a promise, a debt, and a gentle, quiet bond in a world too rough to go it alone. You slip inside your cottage at last, boots dusted with frost and the faint smell of hay still clinging to your sleeves. A thin curl of smoke drifts from the hearth. Your fire's down to embers, but there's just enough glow to warm your hands as you set your rope by the door and tug your coat free. Tonight, the world outside hums with secrets, but here in your tiny kitchen, the cheese wheel's next adventure is far more ordinary: surviving the cellar. Because once the bartering's done and the constable's sniffing stick is a memory, your cheddar's final test isn't the law, it's time itself. Early American cheese making lived or died in the cellar. Those dark, earthy basements that smelled of damp stone and hope. If your will could rest there, aging slow and steady, it might feed your family through the months when fresh milk froze in the pail before you could even pour it. One mainstream fact: proper cheese cellars were a point of pride for any household that could afford to dig them. Many cottages and farmhouses had a pit under the floorboards or a stone chamber built into a hillside, where temperature and moisture stayed just right to coax curds from squeaky newborn lumps to sharp, crumbly perfection. A cellar too warm? Mold crept in fast. Too dry? Your wheel cracked and turned to dusty rind. So you crouch now, lantern in hand, lifting a hatch in your kitchen floor. The darkness breathes out a cold sigh as you descend creaking steps to shelves lined with waxy lumps, some wrapped in muslin, others stacked in old baskets or wedged between crocks of pickled beans and brined carrots. Each wheel is a tiny wager. Did you salt enough? Did you flip it every few days? Did the cloth stay tight? Did the mice find it first? One quirky detail for your sleepy mind. Some cheesemakers swore by odd tricks to keep the cellar ghosts at bay, placing a broom upside down in the corner, scratching protective runes into cellar doors, or hanging sprigs of dried herbs to ward off bad air. Historians still argue whether these little rituals did anything but calm anxious farmers. But hey, if a sprig of sage meant your wheel survived the spring thaw, who'd complain? Picture yourself there now, brush of muslin under your fingertips as you check each wheel for cracks, damp spots, or that suspicious dusting of blue-green fuzz. You lean close, sniff, tap the rind with your knuckles. A soft thud means good moisture inside, a hollow echo means trouble brewing. Sometimes you cut away a spot of mold with a thin-bladed knife, patch the wound with fresh wax, and whisper a hopeful promise to come check again tomorrow. Historians still debate just how scientific these methods were. Colonial cheesemakers knew the basics: salt, time, flip, repeat, but temperature was a guess, humidity judged by touch and sniff. In Europe, whole guilds of cheesemakers kept detailed traditions alive for centuries. On the American frontier, you did your best with what you knew, what your neighbor told you, or what your grandmother scrawled in the back of the Bible between lists of births and deaths. Here's another soft curiosity. Some families marked their wheels with personal stamps, carved wooden presses that pressed little flowers, stars, or initials into the rind. It wasn't just pride. If you bartered a wheel at the next village, that mark told everyone whose cellar it came from, and whether your family's cheese was worth its salt or better left on the shelf for the mice. A crooked stamp could mean a crooked wheel. A clean, proud mark? Maybe an extra candle thrown in when you traded it by moonlight. You shift your lantern, squint at the far corner of the cellar. There, an older wheel slumps against a basket, its rind spotted with fuzz, its edges cracked from one too many nights of dry air. You weigh your options. Salvage the heart by cutting away the bad parts, slip the remains to the pigs, or risk feeding the family a crumbly wedge that might taste more of cellar than cheddar. Sleepy choices in a sleepy world. No inspector to fine you, just your own nose and trust in your skill. One last sleepy thought as you climb back up the steps. Some families kept careful notes pinned to cellar beams, scraps of parchment tracking when a wheel was pressed, when it was flipped, when it should be eaten before the mice claimed it first. No tidy spreadsheets, no modern fridge alarm, just ink, hope, and a farmer's memory sharper than any cheddar rind. You push the hatch closed behind you, feel the faint whoosh of cold air vanish under your feet. Your cellar sleeps now, its secrets safe in the dark. And your wheel, like you, waits for its next test. The hush of winter nights, the flicker of candlelight, and the quiet promise that comes spring, a good cheddar is more than food. It's proof that even in a world of peculiar laws and watchful eyes, your hands can make something last. If you mind the mold, mind the mice, and trust the cellar door to keep the dark at bay. You settle by the hearth, warm fingers cupped around a clay mug of cider while the faint hum of your sleeping cellar rests beneath your floorboards. It's a small comfort, knowing that somewhere down there, wheels of cheddar sit like edible time capsules, waiting for the long frost to pass. But even the most carefully aged cheese had its hurdles beyond mold and mice. For early Americans, one of the strangest hurdles was official measurement. How do you prove your cheddar is honest when the scales are rigged, or the weights slide conveniently in the taxman's favor? One mainstream fact to chew on: colonial markets weren't bustling with standard weights and measures. Instead, the local inspector, sometimes called the sealer of weights and measures, hauled out a battered brass scale, a set of iron weights, and a suspiciously flexible sense of fairness. If your cheese weighed less than claimed, you might face a fine. If it weighed more, the buyer might argue your measure stick was too long, your scale tilted too conveniently toward your profit. So you picture yourself in the village square on market day, sun catching the dull shine of the brass balance beam. You lug your wheel onto the creaking wooden stand, heart thudding as the inspector frowns and squints at the dial. The buyer hovers close, eyes darting between scale and rind. A hush spreads. Nothing stirs curiosity faster than other people's cheese, especially if there's drama in the weighing. One quirky slice of this old cheese saga? Some desperate sellers hid small pebbles in the middle of wheels to nudge the weight up a notch. A trick, yes. If you were unlucky enough to get caught, the fine was steep, and your name soured faster than spoiled curds. Historians still argue whether pebble fraud was widespread or just a whispered threat to keep honest folk on their toes. In bigger towns, local councils printed fiddly laws spelling out exactly how big a wheel should be, how much salt it should contain, and what honest weight looked like. Connecticut and Massachusetts both scribbled down rules for weight by lawful measure, though no one could quite agree on what lawful meant when the scales wobbled on a muddy table. You shift in the crowd now, watching the inspector's nose wrinkle as he leans close, peering for suspicious seams that might hide a contraband stone. Your palms sweat behind your back, your eyes flick to the buyer's grin. A fair way could make your week. A skewed measure could see you trudging home with half your cheddar unsold and your purse no heavier than before. One sleepy morsel for tonight's dreams. Some early American towns had official cheese weighers, elected or appointed, sometimes bribed or bullied. They carried iron weights stamped with the town seal, proof against counterfeits. But diaries hint at sticky palms all the same. Weights shaved down just a hair to tilt the deal, coins slipped from hand to pocket when no one was looking. Historians still debate whether the weighers were heroes of honest trade or simply another part of the village's fragile balancing act. Of course, clever folk found ways around all this. Some cheesemakers sold by the wheel, not by weight. One wheel for 2 chickens, no scale required. Others cut tasting wedges on the spot. Here, nibble this crumbly edge, judge its worth with your own tongue. A fair taste was sometimes safer than a fickle brass balance. Imagine the crowd drifting off as the market day winds down. Buyers clutching wrapped wedges, kids chasing stray dogs past the wagons. You pack your scale-battered wheel back onto the cart, counting your coins or clutching your fresh barter prize. A sack of potatoes, maybe a little slab of pork for Sunday stew. The inspector tips his hat, ledger tucked under his arm. Another day's drama weighed, sniffed, and scribbled away. And you? Well, you've learned that cheddar in early America was more than just curds and salt. It was part gamble, part trust, part side-eye at a wobbly scale that could mean the difference between a warm meal and a cold cellar shelf full of unsold wheels. So you trudge home down the rutted lane, mind replaying the creak of the brass beam, the hush of the watching crowd, the soft knock of the wheel shifting on the cart behind you. Tonight, your cheddar earned its place, fair or foul, honest or nearly so, and tomorrow you'll press a new wheel, weigh it with your own rough hands, and trust that next market day the balance might just tilt your way. One final echo for your sleepy mind. Historians still puzzle over old court notes that hint at entire cheese fairs closed down for cheating scales, angry farmers dragging weighers before local magistrates to demand fair trade. No grand conspiracies, just everyday wheels turning, shifting, and squeaking under the odd creaky laws that tried to weigh a world forever a bit off kilter. You wake before the dawn bell, the embers in your hearth barely warm and your breath puffing white in the hush of your kitchen. The last wheel you traded has bought you a week of stew and candles, but this morning, your cheese must do something stranger than fill a belly or dodge a crooked scale. It must travel. Because in early America, peculiar cheese laws didn't stop at the village gate. They rattled along rough roads and winding rivers, hidden in wagons that stitched colonies together wheel by wheel. One mainstream fact. By the late 1600s and early 1700s, trade routes crisscrossed the colonies like rough seams in a patchwork quilt. Cheese, butter, salted meat, and cider were the lifeblood of countless settlements that had no local farms to spare. A good wheel might travel miles by ox cart, canoe, or coastal sloop, its journey every bit as risky as any merchant's crate of nails or barrels of salt cod. So you picture yourself now, shoulders hunched against the dawn chill, helping lift a stack of wheels onto a neighbor's cart. The wooden planks creak under the weight, each wheel wrapped in muslin, marked with your careful stamp to prove its origin. The driver, a cousin maybe, wipes frost from his beard and grunts a promise to deliver your cheese 3 villages downriver, where the storehouse is low and the buyers are hungry. One quirky nugget for your sleepy thoughts. Cheese smugglers did exist. When local trade rules or taxes squeezed too tight, some folk tucked wheels under sacks of grain or hid wedges inside barrels of flour, sneaking untaxed cheddar past toll houses that demanded a share. Historians still argue whether this petty smuggling fed entire families or just padded a clever trader's purse, but the stories linger in battered court records. Fines for unlawful concealment of dairy, wagons stopped at rickety bridges by constables sniffing for suspicious curds. You squat by the wagon now, double-checking the ties, wondering if your cousin's honest enough not to slip a wheel into his own cellar before he reaches the market. It's not paranoia, it's survival. Once that wheel leaves your yard, your livelihood rattles with it, over frozen ruts, through sudden downpours, past toll gates that sometimes sprang up overnight when a local council smelled easy revenue. One soft slice of trivia. Some villages along busy trade roads built little cheese houses, tiny way stations where wheels could be stored overnight, safe from rain, foxes, and thieves. These weren't fancy inns, just timber sheds with heavy doors and dry stone floors, sometimes watched by a sleepy caretaker paid in. What else? A wedge or two for his supper. Historians still debate how widespread these cheese houses really were. Some say they were vital nodes in fragile supply chains. Others suspect they were glorified sheds used as excuses to collect tolls. Either way, the travelers who used them had their own tricks, wrapping wheels in brine-soaked cloths to keep them fresh, sprinkling extra salt on the rind to fight mold during long weeks on the road. You step back now, watching the wagon creak off into the pale dawn. Hooves clop on frozen mud, wheels squeal against axle grease. If all goes well, your cheddar will trade for tools you can't forge, seeds you can't save, or rare luxuries that make the long winter bearable: coffee, nutmeg, maybe a bright bolt of cloth for your cloak. One last open question to roll around in your drowsy thoughts. Was all this constant moving of cheddar really legal? Local bylaws often clashed with colonial charters. One village might demand a cheese toll at the bridge, another might wave it through to lure trade away from a rival town. Court ledgers brim with petty suits. Merchants suing local councils, farmers suing toll keepers suing each other when wheels vanished mid-journey. And through it all, wheels rolled on, feeding towns that would starve without them. You stand alone in your yard now, the wagon gone, the frost crisp underfoot. You know some wheels might not come back as coins or goods. Some might mold on the road, slip into a thief's sack, or pay a toll keeper's supper on a lonely river crossing. But most will find a table somewhere, cut by a stranger's knife, tasted by a family you'll never meet. So you draw your coat tight and head back inside. Your cellar is half empty, your purse half full, your mind half certain you'll press another wheel tomorrow. Because as odd as the laws work, taxes, tithes, sniffing sticks and secret barns, your cheese has legs now. It moves where you can't, speaks where you're silent, and barters for things you'd never reach alone. And that soft, creaky truth might be the best measure of all. That somewhere down a rutted track or beyond a misty bend in the river, a wedge of your cheddar waits to buy you something warm, bright, and just a bit sweeter than the cold dawn pressing against your kitchen door. Your boots thud softly on the plank floor as you step back inside, breath warming the dim air above the hearth. The wagon's gone, your cellar's lighter, but your mind hums with the quiet clink of future coins, future trades, future wheels waiting to be pressed and brined. And tonight, your thoughts drift to a corner of early America's cheese story so dull it's oddly soothing. The humble cheese tax itself. Those petty, scribbled levies that turned a simple wheel into a line on someone's dusty ledger. One mainstream fact: colonial towns needed coin for roads, schools, and watchmen. With cash in short supply, they taxed what people actually had: grain, livestock, barrels of cider, and yes, cheese. Local councils scribbled out cheese duties that nibbled at each wheel you sold. Sometimes the toll was a portion paid in curds. Sometimes it was coin measured by the wheel's declared weight. Either way, the taxman's sniffing stick was never far behind. So you picture yourself trudging up the steps to the village hall, a wheel tucked under one arm, your best polite nod ready for the clerk who waits by the fire, ledger open, quill tapping like an impatient woodpecker. He weighs your wheel, one eye on the scale, the other on your face. Too light? Suspicious. Too heavy? Suspicious. Just right? Well, the tax still bites the same. One quirky scrap for your sleepy brain. In certain towns, instead of coins, the tax collector sometimes took his slice in actual cheese. A wedge here, a wedge there, tucked into a cold cellar under the clerk's house to feed him through winter. Historians still argue whether some clerks skimmed a little extra for themselves. How many cheese taxes vanished quietly into the clerk's supper stew rather than the village coffers? A petty cheat, maybe, but who'd miss a wedge in a world where ledgers were patchy and curds turned so quickly to mold? You lean against the creaking rail now, wheel balanced on the counter as the clerk scribbles your name, your wheel's weight, your owed portion. A coin clinks down, a tiny payment that promises the roads stay mended, the watchman stays awake, or pretends to, and the market stays more or less honest next month when you return with another wheel. One sleepy piece of trivia. A few colonies, like Pennsylvania, experimented with regional cheese fairs that included tax booths right at the gates. Bring your wheels, show your stamp, pay your cut, then trade freely under canvas tents while fiddlers played and neighbors gossiped about who cheated last harvest. A peculiar balance, fair, friendly, and nosy all at once. Historians still bicker about whether these little cheese taxes actually built roads and bridges or simply lined pockets that were never quite full enough. Some argue the tithes funded parish schools and poor relief. Others claim they mostly fed the clerks, constables, and taxmen who sniffed around your cellar door. Either way, the cheddar moved, the coin trickled, and the ledgers slowly filled with smudged ink and half-remembered wheels. You tug your cloak tighter now, stepping out of the hall into the thin light of dusk. Your purse jingles a little lighter, your cellar echoes a little emptier. But in a world where money was scarce and barter ruled the day, every paid wedge kept your name safe from fines and your wheels moving where they needed to go. One more mellow thought for your drifting mind. Clever folk found polite ways to dodge the tax. A gift wheel here, a family trade there, quiet deals that slipped through the ledger's net, just small enough to keep the clerk's eyebrows low and the constable's boots from stomping up your front steps at dawn. You pass the village notice board on your way home, pinned with curling scraps of parchment. New cheese duties, new fines for undeclared wheels, a threat or two of double tithes if the clerk found hidden curds in your cellar. And yet, behind closed doors and barn walls, the barter still buzzes, quiet as mice in straw. Historians still puzzle over just how many of these odd old laws were enforced to the letter. Some records tell of cheese fines dragged out in dusty courts, but more often they drift off into silence, lost under the weight of more pressing worries. Wolves, droughts, wandering debts, or the next spring's muddy ruts that swallowed wagons whole. You step through your own gate now, the weight of taxes gone from your arms, the soft promise of new cheese already stirring in your mind. The press waits in your kitchen corner, the milk pail leans by the door. Tomorrow you'll pour, stir, salt, and press. And when the wheel's ready, you'll weigh it honest, or honest enough, carry it to the clerk, nod politely, and watch a small slice slip from your cellar shelf to the ledger's lines once more. You close the gate behind you, the latch clicking in the hush of evening as you step inside to the glow of your small hearth. The tax paid, the ledger balanced, at least on paper. But in this hush before sleep, your thoughts drift past the village clerk's quill and crooked scales. You wonder about the wheels that stayed hidden, buried deep behind barrels of cider or tucked under burlap sacks in dusty lofts. Because for every wedge that crossed the taxman's table, another slipped quietly through a neighbor's door with not a coin in sight. One mainstream fact: not every cheddar wheel ended up at market or on a trader's wagon. In the leanest winters, cheese became a hush-hush reserve, an edible bank kept safe for the coldest weeks, when salted pork ran out and root cellars echoed with nothing but sprouting potatoes. Families pressed extra wheels, brined them firm, and tucked them away, sometimes so well hidden that a wheel might go missing for years, only to be found later, rock-hard and sharp enough to crack a knife. You settle by your own hearth now, watching the shadows flicker along the beams. In early America's smaller villages, neighbors often knew who had a secret stash of cheddar, folk too proud to beg if the stew pot ran dry. Quiet kindnesses happened when no ledger watched. A wedge wrapped in muslin left on a doorstep, a knock at midnight with a warm will traded for nothing but a whispered thank you. One quirky story: in parts of New England, some old farmhouses still yield ghost cheese wheels, ancient lumps found in stone walls or attic corners. Historians still argue whether these were hidden taxes dodged, lost trade wheels, or simple insurance against a harsh storm that trapped a family longer than planned. Some stories say a few brave souls cracked one open centuries later, tangy, dry, edible in a pinch if you didn't mind the dust. You shift on your stool, fingers brushing the warm mug at your knee, picturing the quiet trust that kept these hidden wheels safe. No sniffing stick here, no constable to weigh the rind. Just neighbors who pretended not to see you slipping a wedge under your cloak, who turned a blind eye when your cellar seemed too full for a bad harvest year. Small secrets that soften life's sharpest corners. Historians still puzzle over how much of the cheese under the barrel was folk tale and how much was real. Court records show the occasional fine for undeclared wheels, often paid with yet another wedge, ironically enough. But most hidden cheddar left no paper trail. Instead, it left stories of the widow whose winter was eased by a neighbor's secret wheel, of the barn beams where a wedge once waited for a hungry child. Tonight, you picture your own cellar, half empty now, yes, but not barren. You know where you've tucked your best wheels, the ones you'd never declare to the taxman's quill. A small reserve for the coldest nights, when your breath hangs thick in the kitchen air and the stew pot hums with scraps and hope. One soft truth for your sleepy mind. These secret wheels weren't just about defiance or dodging tithes. They were a promise that in a world of petty laws, crooked scales, and wagons that sometimes never came back, you'd have something left when everything else failed. A last slice for the children, a final wedge to swap for a loaf of bread, a gift to a neighbor who knocked on your door with hollow eyes and an empty basket. You lean back now, eyes drifting to the low rafters. Somewhere above, the wind scratches at the shutters, but inside, your hearth hums warm, and your thoughts drift with the quiet weight of wheels hidden and wheels given. Peculiar cheese laws might scribble at your life's edges, sniffing sticks, barter barns, sly wares with light scales, but at the heart of it all sits a small truth, that when the cold came, when the storehouse thinned, when the roads froze solid under a new moon, it was a wedge in a neighbor's hand that truly kept the village stitched together. Historians still debate whether these secret wheels were the stuff of legend or the backbone of survival. Maybe they were both, soft curds pressed into a shape that could outlast hunger and the taxman's ink. Maybe, as you drift to sleep tonight, you'll dream of finding one tucked behind the cider barrel, crumbly, sharp, and oddly comforting proof that sometimes the best insurance is a wedge of cheddar waiting in the shadows. Your mug sits empty now, your eyes half-lidded as the hearth crackles soft and low. The night deepens around your cottage, and your thoughts drift from hidden cellars and clinking scales to one last odd corner of early America's cheese story. The strange truth that even kings and distant parliaments couldn't resist scribbling their power into your humble wheel of cheddar. One mainstream fact. Long before America shook off its old masters, English rulers and colonial governors alike pushed their noses into colonial dairies. Some towns found themselves bound by royal edicts that dictated who could sell cheese, how much salt they must use, even which markets could legally host a cheese fair. A king's decree might land by ship in Boston Harbor and echo all the way to your drafty barn, though whether you obeyed it was another matter entirely. So you picture yourself now, hunched over a creased scrap of parchment nailed to the village notice board, by order of His Majesty's Council. It begins, before droning on about standard wheel sizes, fair weights, and a new tax on export cheese bound for English tables. You squint at the fine print, then glance at your cellar door, half amused, half annoyed at the thought that your wheel, pressed by calloused hands on a dirt floor, somehow belonged in the same breath as royal orders. One quirky truth for your drifting thoughts. A few enterprising colonists found ways to flip these royal cheese rules to their favor. If the crown taxed exported cheese, clever traders sold local-only wedges at inflated prices, claiming their curds were too delicate for travel. Suddenly, every crumb of cheddar in your cellar was twice as valuable just by pretending it wouldn't survive the ship ride. Historians still argue whether such loopholes were widespread or just local mischief, but they linger in faded letters and the occasional angry note from a governor sniffing out cheese smugglers. You stand at the edge of your yard now, watching a lantern swing on a neighbor's porch. The wind carries the faint whiff of barn hay and cold milk. For all the fancy proclamations and scribbled laws, your cheese stays local more often than not, pressed for your table first, then for barter, maybe a hush-hush wheel for the neighbor's debt. The king's men might weigh your barrels at the port, but out here, your cellar keeps its secrets as tight as the barn door in January. Historians still debate whether royal meddling made much difference to village life. One moment, a governor bans exports of inferior curds to protect England's reputation for fine cheese. The next, your neighbor carts half your wheels upriver under cover of night, swapping them for iron nails or a barrel of molasses that somehow never appears in the crown's tax log. You wander back inside now, fingers brushing the rim of your empty mug. The hearth pops, sparks swirl, shadows dance on the old beams overhead. For all its petty rules, sniffing sticks, barn bartering, cellar secrets, early America's cheese trade was never really about who ruled or who taxed. It was about survival stitched together by curds, cloth, and careful trust in neighbors who knew when to nod, when to look the other way, and when to knock at your door in the hush before dawn with a wheel cradled like a quiet promise. One last sleepy fact. In the decades before revolution swept the colonies, those same tangled cheese laws became quiet kindling for bigger fights. Petty taxes on cheddar and butter reminded families just how far away the crown sat, and how easily a wheel hidden behind a cider barrel could slip past a royal clerk's ledger. Small defiance, maybe, but sometimes it's the tiny wedges that feed a larger appetite for freedom. So you settle deeper into your chair now, eyelids drooping, the last echo of frost tapping at your shutter. Your cellar sleeps below you, half empty, half full, a hush of wheels aging in the dark. Somewhere beyond your candle's reach, wagons creak on muddy roads, neighbors trade wedges for fence posts, clerks sniff at ledgers that will never quite match the truth tucked behind barn doors. And as the embers settle to a soft, pulsing glow, you let one final gentle thought warm your mind, that in a world of peculiar laws, sniffing sticks, and royal proclamations, your humble wheel of cheddar was never just food. It was currency, neighborly promise, secret insurance, and quiet rebellion, wrapped in muslin and aged in the hush of cellars that whispered through centuries of winter nights just like this one. And now, as the last crumb of old cheddar crumbles away in your sleepy mind, you feel the hush settle deep in your bones. The flicker of your hearth slows to a soft glow, warm shadows dancing lazy shapes on timber walls that have seen winters come and go, storms rage and fade, and countless wheels press and rest in the hush of your cellar below. Outside your window, the night deepens. The wind hums through the eaves, a low, secret tune that's carried these stories of peculiar laws and hidden wedges across time to your quiet corner tonight. You breathe out slow, feel your shoulders sink deeper into your chair, feel the weight of 1,000 forgotten wheels settle like a warm quilt across your drifting thoughts. Maybe tomorrow you'll lift a cellar hatch in your dreams, brush your fingertips across cool muslin, check for mold with a gentle tap. Maybe you'll trade a wedge for a whispered promise, pass a wheel over a fence under the hush of moonlight. Or maybe you'll just rest easy, knowing that in a world once scribbled over by constables and clerks and distant kings, a simple wheel of cheddar kept neighbors fed, debts settled, fences mended, and fires burning bright through the coldest months. So close your eyes now. Let the hush of old cellars and soft snowfall wrap around your mind. Trust the wheel to wait in the dark, sharp and steady, ready for whatever tomorrow brings. And as your breath evens out, drifting deep and calm, remember, sometimes the simplest stories, the ones about cheese and neighborly nods, carry us safest through the longest nights. Good night, sleep well, and sweet dreams.